Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, July 9th, 2026. I'm Jake Neer in Detroit, in for Kellen Walker. Today on the show, BMW is running away with the U.S. luxury sales crown, inventories are holding steady, and so is pricing discipline, and Tata and JLR are pledging to work more closely together, even as one of their biggest joint plans falls apart. Plus, Borton Volvo CEO Kjell Bergh says the Polestar ban might be settled, but the question of who gets targeted next is not.
It's also not quite clear how durable the written guarantee for Volvo to be able to produce and import in this country, how durable that is.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. U.S. new vehicle inventories ticked up slightly to start July at just under 3 million vehicles. That's still within the range where automakers and dealers are maintaining pricing discipline. According to data firm Catalyst IQ, that represents a 75-day supply at current selling rates, flat from June and 5 days below last year. Hybrids remain the fastest turning segment at 63 days, while EVs sit at 70 and traditional gas vehicles at 78. BMW has a firm grip on the U.S. luxury sales crown so far. The German brand posted a 13% sales jump in the second quarter, delivering more than 102,000 vehicles and stretching its lead over second-place Lexus to more than 17,000 vehicles. Lexus dropped 7.5% in the quarter, weighed down by a redesign of its ES sedan. Mercedes rounded out the top three. BMW of North America EVP Sean Bugbee says the automaker is ahead of its first-half targets and on track to finish 2026 ahead of last year. And Tata Motors and its Jaguar Land Rover subsidiary are pledging a closer working relationship, even as a key platform sharing deal falls apart. Tata shelved plans to use JLR's electric architecture for its new Avinya brand, opting instead for a Chery platform. But JLR CEO P.B. Balaji, who came over from Tata Motors last year, says synergies through battery production, software, and shared suppliers remain central to JLR's goal of cutting nearly $2.25 billion in costs by mid-2028. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all of those stories at autonews.com. The U.S. has declined to renew USMCA for 16 years, putting the auto industry in limbo. Annual reviews now run through 2036, and for an industry making decade-long investment decisions, that uncertainty could cost North America production, jobs, and competitiveness. That's according to industry groups who are warning about this development. Joining me now to talk about it is Greg Layson, digital and mobile editor of Automotive News Canada and the host of the Automotive News Canada podcast. Greg, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Good to be back.
All right, so tell me what this annual review actually means. What does that mean, and what does it mean in practice for an automaker that's trying to decide right now whether to build a plant in Canada or Mexico?
What this appears to mean is we're going to go through this song and dance every single year for a decade. What we've been going through for the last 18 months or so now happens on an annual basis. And so then you have to ask yourself, as the automakers are, how do we plan investment? How do we plan product rollout? How do we allot product and production across all three countries in North America? It becomes really difficult to plan 3, 5, 7, and 10 years out when and where you're going to build vehicles when you don't know if they're tariff-free, you don't know if there's reciprocal tariffs still in Canada, you don't know if there are 232 tariffs in America. All of that now is uncertainty, which any business, not just the auto business, can't stand, and makes it really difficult to plan, be productive, be efficient, and run sort of as seamlessly as the North American auto industry has over the last 30 years or so. This is a real problem for automakers. And for politicians, it's now we have to sit down at the table every year. You might have a different government in Canada, the United States, and Mexico every time you do so. So who knows when this gets resolved? The crazy part is it could get resolved at any moment. If the United States drops 232s, if Canada puts U.S. liquor back on its shelves, if the Gordie Howe Bridge comes to some sort of resolution, all of these things could happen and we could be back to status quo. Now, in the meantime, everything runs in force as is. So it's as if nothing changed other than you don't have a long-term outlook. And that's the difficult part.
So is there still a chance that this won't be the case? And could we also see, as you alluded to there, an early renewal? Like, what would it take for all three countries to get there?
Well, first, it takes everyone to be a willing participant. And I think the United States and Mexico appear to have a better relationship. You know, I was told just yesterday that they've had about 3 or 4 meetings, official meetings on USMCA, whereas Canada and the United States might have had one and it was very short. These are from the insiders around the table that are talking to me saying, look, the United States is just dealing better with Mexico than they are with Canada. Now, that might be Canada's ploy. That might be the United States ploy. That might be their tact. I don't know who's deciding when and where to meet. But at any given moment, if everyone can come to terms, then yes, it could be renewed and we could be in for a long-term stable work, business, auto environment. But until then, now you're staring down these renegotiations and these tit for tat tariffs and these other sort of irritants that everyone's putting in place to try and get what they want at the bargaining table to renew USMCA. And don't forget, Donald Trump and the United States, anyone for that matter, either country, could say we're out altogether, giving 6 months notice. Now, that is the worst case scenario. And I talked to Flavio Volpe of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association right before July 1st when the United States decided to not renew. And I said, I think what's flown under the radar is that the second worst scenario is also really bad. And we are now in that second worst scenario. It is this time of uncertainty when, by the way, Unifor and the Detroit Three are trying to negotiate new collective bargaining agreements here. And then I believe it's next year that the UAW has to do the same. So how does an automaker decide which concessions to give up, which products to give a union and a country and a jurisdiction when there's so much in flux? That's the real difficult part.
Challenging for the auto industry, Greg. A little bit of job security for you and me here in the media. We have plenty to talk about going forward for the foreseeable future, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Donald Trump has kept all of us in the auto industry busy, just covering the topics, the stories, and the turns. And he's halfway through his term. I don't think we're halfway through this mess. I don't know when there's a solution. I've been told probably early 2027. Now, the union, they want it now so that we can get down to brass tacks in terms of contract talks. What products go into these empty factories? Brampton in Ontario, owned by Stellantis, for example. Cami, owned by GM in Ingersoll. Both empty, both idle, both looking for product, both in flux because there's no USMCA that is in place for the long term.
Greg, always appreciate your insights on these things. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Joining me now is Kjell Bergh, CEO of Borton Volvo in Golden Valley, Minnesota. Volvo, like Polestar, is owned by China's Geely, but Volvo was granted authorization to keep selling in the U.S. Polestar was not, even though neither of the two vehicles Polestar sells here is built in China, and one of them rolls off the line at Volvo's plant in Charleston, South Carolina. Bergh wrote a guest commentary for us at Automotive News, arguing the decision sets a troubling precedent. Kjell Bergh, welcome to Daily Drive.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So you're a Volvo dealer, and you have real skin in the game here. So walk us through what the Commerce Department actually ruled here as you understand it, and why you think that the Polestar decision doesn't hold up on its own terms.
So there are a couple of things to consider. One is that the two Polestar models that we're selling in the United States are made respectively in Korea and in South Carolina, United States, not in China, which has been the target of the Commerce Department actions in these cases. And Polestar, while it's affiliated with Volvo, and Volvo is an investor, it's not a subsidiary of Volvo. It's a sister company. And what makes us different essentially is that all of Polestar's models currently offered for sale are 100% electric. And we're using essentially the same platform as the Volvos that are built alongside on the South Carolina assembly line. And Volvo is specifically given clearance to continue to sell the cars that are made there essentially on similar terms. So that's puzzling. I think there are a couple of things to consider. One is Volvo is still in the United States primarily offering vehicles that have internal combustion engines and mostly in a hybrid configuration, but also fully electric. But the bulk of our cars are still sold in a hybrid or ICE combination, and that's different from Polestar. And the administration has shown an unwillingness to promote new generation, new energy vehicles to the same level as in earlier administrations. So the fact is that since Polestar is 100% electric and a very low volume seller in the United States because it's a new brand, unlike Volvo, Polestar is an easier target than Volvo, which has a very large presence and a very large unit and operation count in the United States.
And describe how this would affect you and your business directly, that you are selling these two Polestar models. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we also have just a handful of the earlier model Polestar 2, which have been demonstrators that are now being offered for sale as well. But we're not haven't been importing the Polestar 2s recently. Since the announcement was made, sales have been absolutely terrific, and we're depleting the inventory very fast because unlike, for example, when Fisker went out of business, Volvo is going nowhere, and Volvo is the contractual service, parts, and warranty provider for Polestar and will remain so after Polestar quit selling cars in the United States. So you're not being orphaned, in other words. So the net effect for a Polestar aficionado is that he or she will get a car at roughly a $25,000 discount or better without giving up any of the follow-on protection for parts, service, warranty, and software upgrades, which is also very important.
In your guest commentary for us at Automotive News, you point out, you sort of raise this question that for Volvo and Polestar dealers seems kind of alarming, which is, and for everybody else, who is next in this? Where will the regulatory line be drawn? Volvo has a large Chinese shareholder in Geely. It's owned by Geely. GM and Ford have deep joint venture ties in China. Mercedes-Benz does too. How far do you think the ownership rules that the Commerce Department is using could actually reach? How far do those tentacles go?
So I think it essentially depends on how the administration views the level of cooperation from the countries involved. The Chinese government, for example, does not own Geely, it does not own Volvo, does not own Polestar, but there are enterprises in other fields such as aviation in the United States, where the Chinese government actually owns the enterprise, and they're not being touched by this. And the irony, as I said, is that we're hurting our own self-interest here in the sense that there's no particular reason to believe that our trading partners would feel obligated to keep buying American products if we buy them from our markets. That's a huge concern for a number of industries that I have heard from already since this hit the waves.
In your commentary, you mention NADA and AIADA. I'm curious what you are hoping to hear from those organizations or see them do in this situation. Have you heard anything from them since this ruling came down?
Yeah, I heard back from AIADA immediately, and they're quite concerned and are making this a centerpiece, as I understand it, of their next board meeting interest of full disclosure, I'm the former AIADA chairman, but I also contacted a recent NADA chairman, who's a friend of mine who recently finished his term on the board of NADA, who was equally concerned. He owns a number of brands that could potentially be affected. And he asked the leadership at NADA to respond, and without putting either one of them as targets here, I just say that I thought that the response from the organization was weak. NADA is in a different position than AIADA because NADA has historically been more of a domestic manufacturer and retailer organization. And of course, the reality now is that 48% of all cars sold in America are made by international nameplates. I'm not sure that NADA has woken up to that reality 100% yet, because I think that a lot of their board members still are very large Detroit-based manufacturer. And there are many folks that think that Chrysler or Stellantis is still an American company, which of course it is not, but they get thrown into the same category as being domestic, which they're not.
Now, again, you're a Volvo dealer who sells Polestars. I'm curious what you make of the, I guess you can call it a disconnect here in the way that the government is treating Volvo and its Chinese associations and ties compared to Polestar. That was one of the first things we heard when we published the story was, why does Volvo get the pass here and Polestar doesn't? It doesn't seem to make intuitive sense. What do you make of that?
No, and I would agree with that. Obviously, I'm relieved that that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
And while I haven't seen the ruling from the Commerce Department in writing, so I'm not given to be very specific in my comment on that. But what I will say is that the Volvo situation is different in the sense that it potentially affects millions of people instead of 40,000 Polestar owners in the United States. And the fact is that when we opened up the groundbreaking for the factory in South Carolina, I happened to be a guest. And among the two guests, interesting, was Trump's first United Nations ambassador, Nikki Haley, who was the sitting governor at the time, and senior Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. They were both there enthusiastically welcoming the Volvo plant. But of course, the Polestar, while it doesn't own a part of the plant, it does produce there in smaller volume. And my understanding of the Commerce Department is that their wish is for international nameplate manufacturers, or for that matter, Detroit-based manufacturers, to bring manufacturing back to the United States. That makes sense. You know, every government should have as its first obligation to look after its own country. All countries are elected, their leadership is elected to do that. So I'm fine with that. But the point is that that's exactly what Volvo is doing in having built the plant, invested $1.3 billion so far in South Carolina, and with having moved over this sourcing for the Polestar 4 production to the United States. That's now the only place in the world where it will be built. We're doing exactly what the Commerce Department intended for us to do. So again, a little unclear on why Volvo is favored. Polestar is not, and it's also not quite clear how durable the written guarantee for Volvo to be able to produce and import in this country, how durable that is, because I haven't seen it and I don't know if it has a date certain. I think it's more an open-ended one that essentially says if you comply with the following terms and you agree not to use electronics which are potentially harmful to the interest of the United States from the point of foreign intelligence and so forth, then presumably we will be allowed to continue to import and to produce in this country. but I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to that with certainty.
Have you already started thinking of contingencies or anything that, I mean, what would you do in the event that Volvo loses its certification?
So two things. First of all, at the age of 80, I haven't learned how to spell retire yet. I had little plans to retire, but because we are, to be fairly direct but truthful, we're one of the more profitable and largest and 5 oldest Volvo dealers in North America. And as a result, I have a constant stream of potential buyers that contact me, both brokers and individual dealer groups and individuals, to include 2 yesterday. And my answer is always the same. I'm not planning to sell. The caveat to that, you have to put an asterisk on it, because I'm a businessman with substantial holdings, is that my level of trust in my government in terms of predictability and acting as a rational actor is substantially diminished from what it has been in earlier decades.
Mm. Is there anything else that you want other dealers, anyone else in our audience of industry insiders to know about what you think could be the bigger implications of all this?
Well, let's take a couple. I mentioned in my commentary Boeing, for example, in South Carolina. I chose that because that's where the Volvo plant is located, which produces both Volvo and Polestar, as I said. And to my understanding, the very bulk of the Boeing Dreamliners, the only product they produce there, are for export sales. And I checked to see who the users of those planes were. And as of last year, there were 11 domestic carriers in China that bought and flew Boeing Dreamliners. So when it's time for them to expand or to replace their existing fleet as it gets older, my guess is that the next phone call is going to be, hello, Airbus. We would like to talk to you about buying 400 long-haul jets from you. One example. There are other examples that can backfire on us. Because of NATO, the F-35 Joint Strike Force test fighter, which is the Generation 5 fighter plane, and I believe to be the best in the world, NATO is promoting that, and America is obviously promoting that as the strike force fighter of choice. And given the kind of treatment that we're giving our top trading partners these days, we're already seeing cracks in the wall of people are saying, okay, I'll raise my hand for X number of F-35 fighters. Canada is on that list. They're thinking about putting another brand in there other than an American-made jet. Brazil just took delivery of their first non-American jets instead of F-35s, and there are quite a few European countries who are looking at the same thing. Bottom line is the same. If you see the polls in Europe, I happen to be going to Europe tonight, and I have friends all over Europe. I speak several European languages, so I talk about this all the time, and I listen, and they all say, we no longer trust America to be a reliable partner. So Norway, where I come from, which has bought 54 F-35s, for example, recently signed a pact to be under the nuclear umbrella of France because they weren't sure that they could rely on the American nuclear NATO umbrella for protection. So that's far off the field of automobiles. But since you asked what other fields could be implicated, that's as far-ranging as the answer can go.
Sure. Well, Kjell Bergh, I really appreciate you taking the time. Great guest commentary in the pages of Automotive News this week, and you can find it at autonews.com. Thanks again for joining us today on Daily Drive.
Thank you very much, Jake. Pleasure.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Jake Neer. Thanks to our own Larry Velaquette and Jack Walsworth for their reporting for today's show. We also had reporting from Greg Layson and Nick Gibbs of our sibling publications, Automotive News Canada and Automotive News Europe. You can get the latest news on the Polestar ban, USMCA trade negotiations, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Cox Automotive Executive Analyst Aaron Keating. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.